Hi, folks. Welcome to episode 13 of the second season of the Lemons and Pineapples podcast. Today, my guest is Jessica Frew, and we're talking about ways to improve your decision making. So if you know you need to make a decision, but you're putting it off or you're getting stuck in analysis paralysis, this episode is for you. First, a bit about my guest. Jessica is a wife, ex-wife, mum, stepmom, and bold action taker. She believes that we find true peace, connection, and confidence by making the next right decision. Jessica helps you make clear, confident, and concise decisions to lead to a bold life that feels in alignment with who you were created to be through her triple B decision-making process, which we're going to talk a bit more about. Welcome to the podcast, Jessica.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'm very excited for our conversation today. I think this is going to be really, really insightful and interesting. So I am a quick decision maker, and my attitude is if I get it wrong, I will pivot or I'll course correct or I will just manage. However, I'm guessing that the women you work with do not share the same love of snap decision making. So tell me a little bit about you, because I know you've got a very interesting story, and how you've come to be working in what I think is a super specialist niche of coaching women about how to make decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. So whenever people ask me to tell them about me, I'm like, all right, it starts when I met my ex-husband. And we met in college, and it was like we were together. We met and then we were together every day after that. We met in February. We were married by December, super quick. And 6 months into our marriage, I was like scrolling on our computer, and this was back when like pop-ups happened on your computer, and all of this pornography started popping up on my computer. And I wasn't concerned about the pornography, but there were no women in sight in it. And I was like,
Oh,
oh, okay, this is like, okay, what's happening here? And I confronted him that night, and I'm like, hey, this happened. Are you gay? And he's like, no, I'm not gay. I just always felt it was better to just look at men and not disrespect women. And this is coming from, we were raised in a very conservative Christian religion, both of us. And so he had created this story and kept himself very much in denial about the fact he was gay. And so in that moment, I'm like, okay, sure. Like, okay. And I was like, sure, some straight men might look at gay pornography or just men, but I knew in my gut that my husband was probably gay. And so we continued forward because we were happy together. Like we had so much fun. Everything was good. People always are like, what about your sex life? It was fulfilling. Like all of those things were in place. And we continued forward. A few years later, he was in counseling, and the counselor was like, all of these things are an issue, but it's not going to get better until you accept the fact that you are gay. And at that point, he came out to me, and we continued forward in our marriage because, again, we were told this is the only right way. This is the path you're supposed to be on. And also, we were happy. Like, we really enjoyed each other. And him being able to open up to me actually brought us closer together because now I was the only one that knew really who he was and what he was going through. And vice versa. I mean, at that point, nobody knew what I was dealing with either. And it just really brought us close together. We ended up having a daughter 5 years into our marriage. But then 2 years after that, he did have an affair, and it was like everything crumbled. We tried to make it work after that, but he was no longer attracted to me. He was like, I thought that I would be disgusted and repulsed by this. And it just felt so right. He's like, other than the fact, I have totally ruined our relationship and I know I've hurt you. It's like outside of that, this felt so natural and right. So we got divorced and we continued forward. But in that, we made a decision, like a big decision in that moment of like, how do we want this to look like? You plan out how your life's going to look like married. You kind of have this idea of how your life's going to go. And then you get divorced. And I think this is where a lot of the issues come from in divorce. It's like, well, now what the hell does this look like? What do I do from here? How do I figure this out? And so we made a decision, like we sat down and kind of mapped out what we hoped our lives would look like post-divorce, and really tried to do that in times when our emotions weren't high, because obviously there were still big emotions happening during this time. I'd experienced betrayal. Steve was dealing with huge self-betrayal, all of these things. And And we decided that we wanted to try to have the best relationship we could for our daughter and for each other. It helps everybody when you can do this. But we set out an outline of like, how can this look? And really decided, okay, if we could remain friends, if we can be each other's cheerleaders, if we can make it so that when our daughter Penny has anything in her life that's important to her, that she can invite both her parents and not have to worry about us being in the same room, that's our ultimate goal. And basically everything we try to decide within our relationship has kind of like circled around that intention. Hard conversations done out of love so that we can create that. Fast forward, we are, oh man, 12 years, 12 and a half years post-divorce. I am remarried. I've been remarried for 11 years now, which has been a whole nother crazy experience. I'm always like, I see why second marriages end so quickly and for so many reasons. But we are here 11 years in, and it's amazing. And Steve and I are still very good friends. Like, he is still very much a part of our lives. We hosted a podcast together for 5 years. We recently just pivoted on that. And he has a partner now who's been around for several years, who is a part of our family as well. And it's been interesting to me to see how the decision making process plays into this. And like you're saying, you're able to make those snap decisions. I'm a pretty quick decision maker as well. And there's some things I take more time on, but relatively fast for anybody I know. And I think that's a gift that some of us are given in being able to really trust our gut and understand that. And also something that's instilled in us as kids, where we were given the opportunity to actually trust ourselves instead of just being told, oh, your feelings that doesn't hurt that bad. It's not that big of a deal. You shouldn't want that. You shouldn't do that. There's something that's been ingrained in us that it's okay to trust who we are. It's okay to trust our gut in those decision-making processes. And that's made a huge difference in my life. And so I've come around to, I helped women for a while who were specifically in my same situation, who had a partner come out. And now I've brought in, because I've seen there's so many women in self-betrayal that we've been trained that that's the way to do life. And it really keeps us from being able to make decisions and act on them that are right for us. And so I've been able to create a life based on that, of like, listen, I get to trust myself. And now it's something that can be taught. We can regain this ability to make decisions and to feel confident in those decisions. And just as you were saying in the beginning, you make the decision knowing that no matter the outcome on the other side, I can shift, I can pivot. Like, this isn't an end all be all. This is just a decision that's then going to give me clarity for the next one. So there's like the overview of who I am and what I do.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, there's so much in there. And what I hear in there is that you and your ex-husband made a very conscious decision to choose what was happening in your lives. And I think that is key, isn't it? To having good relationships with people, to communicating well with people, is thinking through what you're doing before you do it, not being at the mercy of emotions and allowing kind of unconscious stuff to run the show. One thing that stood out for me, because this has been something I've been talking about on my podcast, is being able to approach those difficult conversations. And you talked about both of you being very conscious of choosing to have any big conversations when you were not in a state of being triggered. Now, that's a very powerful decision to have made, because most people don't do that. In fact, just this morning, something happened at home yesterday, and I was a little bit irked, and I chose not to tackle it just before my husband walked out the door this morning.
Yes.
I wanted to, and then I thought, what the hell good is it going to do this now? I'm agitated and annoyed. He knows I'm annoyed, and he's just about to leave for work. This is only going to end one way. So I'm just going to taper back my need to conflict resolve immediately, because I've noticed that's something I like to do. It's like, let's just get this dealt with so we don't have this anymore, and then we can move on. And sometimes you have to learn to sit in the difficult feelings. So anyway, it wasn't that major, but I thought I will just tackle it when I can say, please, could we have a conversation? Here is why I was annoyed this morning. when you're not
Yes.
annoyed is the time to do it. And I think that's such a powerful insight that you've shared there, because so often we make choices from a space of being triggered, of being angry, of being jealous, of being, and that's not a good place to make decisions from at all.
And that is information. Like, you don't want to ignore those feelings. You don't want to just suppress them and push them down, but
Yep.
doing exactly like what you're saying. And I think some people get those two things confused. We're not saying you ignore it. We're not saying you push it down. We're not saying you don't acknowledge that it's there. But often having the conversation around what happened is better in an hour or two, like later that day. And sometimes, people will push, like, oh, we need to have this conversation now. If you're not ready, saying like, I want to have this conversation with you, but I am not in the right emotional space to have it and still be constructive. I want to come out of this conversation still loving and appreciating you, or still supporting you, or whatever that relationship looks like. And therefore, this isn't the time for me to have that conversation. And there were many times, like, Steve and I would say that, like, I'd be like, hey, I want to talk about this. He's like, I can't right now. I see it. I will have this conversation with you, but I can't emotionally right now, and vice versa. And we got really good at just respecting that in each other, saying, okay, I understand that. Take your time because we're processing through a lot here, and we'll come back to it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge amount of things to go through.
Yeah.
One thing that you talked about was learning to trust your gut. So you
Mm.
shared that you'd been brought up in a very Christian, very conservative household. And I think often when there is a lot of external programming that's put on you, and this is very common for women, it's something I see is I'll have women say to me, I did this. I knew in my heart, or I knew in my gut told me that it wasn't the right thing to do, but I went ahead and did it anyway. So just talk to me a little bit about the process of relearning to trust your gut when you've not been allowed to. Because
Yeah,
I think it's a process. It's one you have to kind of,
it is.
you've got to jump in and, not even jump in, you've got to sort of step in and out a little bit with it to feel it out. So
Yeah.
just talk to me about what that was like for you.
Yeah, for me, I've been someone who at a young age was taught to trust my gut. Even though I was in this conservative Christian religion, I realized I didn't have the same experience as most people, where, yes, there's an authority figure, we're supposed to do what we're told type thing. And also, I knew that I could do what I needed and trust that. And so I think that's a gift that I was given, but I saw that at a young age. I remember, so part of my whole platform is to be bold. And that was instilled in me by my dad. He would say, when I was trying to make a big decision or even a small decision, he would be like, BB, Jessica, BB, which meant to be bold and true to my heart and do what was right for me. And I always knew I had that support of my parents, even if they didn't fully understand or agree with it, they were there behind me most of the time. you know but and so I've been able to build on that and really just have this deep connection to myself. Now, I lost that when I was in my second marriage. Starting out my second marriage is when I really felt like I lost that connection. And I spiraled into this need to prove my worth, need to prove my value, so that my second husband, would keep me around. I needed him to know that I was worth keeping around. I needed his ex-wife to know. I needed his kids to know. Like, I had something to prove, and it almost ended our marriage. And partially because he was working through his own crap, and in him working through his own crap, I felt him pulling away, and therefore I'm grasping at straws to bring him in. And I left him at one point, and I was like, I'm done. I'm losing myself. And I thought I was afraid to lose him, and I realized I was more afraid to lose myself in that moment. And I came back a couple days later. He wasn't real happy that I was coming back. I was like, I am coming back though. And I didn't speak this to him. I just knew in my heart, if I am coming back to try this one more time, because I knew we were good together, we just needed to figure out a lot of stuff. I'm coming back being true to myself and trusting my gut and making those decisions. And it comes at one decision at a time, is what I tell women. And I'm like, this starts with, what do you actually want to put on your body? What is going to feel good for you to dress in today? Not what you should wear, not what you've been told you should wear. And again, in like Christian conservative upbringing. You know, I was very much trained, you don't wear tank tops, you wear certain things and all this stuff. And so trusting that in yourself of like, but what feels right for me and good for me? And then there were things like, what do I want to eat? Most of us don't even know, because we've been like, first of all, I need to be healthy and I need to whatever, and all of these things around that. And then also, most of us are feeding other people along the way. And so we don't know what it is we actually want. We're just taking in everybody else's information. So I always tell people to start very small. You start really small. And the more you start telling that voice inside of you that you are going to listen to it and you are going to act on it, you can't just hear it. You have to act on it, the louder it gets and the clearer it gets. And the more confident you are that sometimes I'm going to make a mistake on this decision, but it's just information on the other side. It doesn't mean I'm a failure. It doesn't mean that I'm doing anything wrong. It just is information of like, hey, you tried this thing, it didn't work. It's not for you. And now you go the other direction, and you can do that with confidence and clarity, and you can act with concision. And so it's just this very step-by-step doable process, because that's the other thing is we get like all wrapped up into it has to be all or nothing, and I have to make these drastic changes, and that doesn't serve us. It has to be one little small thing at a time, and then we gain that confidence in ourselves and in trusting our gut, and we're like, okay, I can trust this, I can act on this.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful. Because often I think as women, and this is something I coach people around as well, is women don't know what they want, because like you've said, that women, a lot of women are inherent people pleasers. Perhaps they've been in situations where their confidence has been completely eroded. It's no surprise to me that you said when you felt your second husband pulling away that you started to be very triggered by that, because it's a wound, it's a deep wound that you had to work through and do your own work to and work with that to move through that. And kudos to you for doing that, because I think nobody would have blamed you for making a hasty exit, because I mean, what are the chances of two gay husbands? But I mean, never say never, right? I don't know. How unfortunate could one person be? I don't know.
Thank heavens that didn't happen. And I haven't known anybody yet that has happened to. But it's like the biggest fear of women who have been through this situation, Carrie. They're like, well, I didn't know the first time. How will I know the second time? I'm like, oh, you will be able to tell. Trust me.
Yeah. And I think also there's that element
see the signs.
I don't think you could be that. I don't think it could happen to you twice, but
yeah.
Jury's out there, folks. If anyone knows anybody who that has happened to, I think we need to hear about it. So just talk me through. So you've talked about making decisions really easy, making them really small, and making it manageable, especially if you've not been asking yourself, what is it I actually want? So let's say actually you're living in a life that you don't really want. That's something you've got to change one choice at a time.
Yes.
I mean, don't know. It depends how risk averse you are, but I don't think that's the time to upturn everything. It's starting, like you've said, with small things. What is it I want? What is it I want instead? What's in the way of that? And what's the smallest step I can take to start to move myself towards that?
Yeah, it's part of like smallerizing these decisions and then exploring the options before we jump at this huge drastic thing. And sometimes you are just ready for the leap because you have sat in it for so long. But most of the time it's like, okay, let's feel out what it might be like to start doing things on my own. Because very often when we're in a life or a relationship, it's usually a relationship or even a relationship with your job where you're like, I'm not happy or content. We're in a codependent situation. Like we are in an unhealthy relationship with our partner or an unhealthy relationship with our job. And what steps can I take to start releasing the codependency or whatever that? So can I do one thing a week that is just for me? Is there something that I can do that feels good each day outside of this relationship with my partner, and start feeling what it feels like to do things on your own, or to even start like, I'm not content in my job. What is it that I might want? Like start exploring just other jobs of like these simple things that I think we overlook because it seems
Mhm.
so basic. Like, oh,
Yes.
I could just see what this feels like. I could talk to somebody in that industry and pick
Yes.
their brain of like, would this fulfill these things that I'm wanting to do? Instead, I think often we just jump. We either jump too big or we don't jump at all. I think there's like
Yes.
this huge thing. And so we have to go through this process of like, what if we just take smaller steps? And I call it smallerizing. I got that word from one of my coaches a long time ago. I was like, that is exactly what we do. We smallerize things.
Yeah.
We are going to make it, chop it down into these little doable steps. When people are ready to leave their partner, if they really think they're ready, I'll be like, okay, well, let's feel out. Because again, like the big concern is finances or whatever. I'm
Mhm.
like, you need to have a call with this. I have different contacts with these people who will help you look at your finances. What do you need in place so that you actually feel empowered going into this process? And if you get in there and you're like, not just because of finances, but you start going through this process and you're like, you know what? I don't really want a divorce, but I do need to heal this other thing on the other side to be able to make it through. It starts giving you that information. Like
Yeah.
just taking the action gives you that information. And it doesn't mean you have to get a divorce just because you're looking into it. It just means you are making a conscious choice to stay on the other end. So, like, it gives you an actual choice instead of just that should. Well, I should stay. And when we should on ourselves, it's placing judgment. And
Yeah.
it is telling ourselves, no, I have to do this thing. This is what I'm supposed to do. This is what I've been told I need to do. Instead of being like, well, I could stay or I could leave. What actually feels good in my heart? So we got to break it down.
I think that's just so brilliant. If you're thinking about doing something big, if you're thinking about a big decision, take the time to dip a toe in the water. Like you've said, research it, gather information. Then you are making a decision from a place of really actively choosing. Because I think something a lot of people do is they leave one relationship because it's not great, don't do any inner work, jump into another one, find that it's really unfortunate, but the same pattern seems to be playing out
Yep.
again. And it will keep going until you take the time to heal the stuff. And healing the
Yeah.
stuff might mean doing your own work and staying and having some difficult conversations and going to couples counseling. That's it. And that's a hell of a lot less stressful than going from husband to or wife, whatever, to
Yeah.
again and again and again. Jessica, talk to me about your triple B decision making formula. I'm quite intrigued by
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, and this stems from going back to that be bold mindset of like, okay, this is what I was taught. This is how I work through things. And people come to me all the time. They're like, but how do I do this? And I'm like, this is how. And it is so there's three steps that we focus on in the triple, obviously triple B. But it is first, we are going to be gentle with ourselves. We are so hard on ourselves and so judgmental. And we think that that is going to propel us forward and that is going to get us taking action, but it's not. Until we can be gentle and loving with ourselves and give ourselves grace, we can't move forward. And so that's that first step is we are going to learn to be gentle and gracious with ourselves. And then we are going to be humble, which means that we are going to learn about ourselves. It doesn't mean we're going to be a doormat. It doesn't mean that we do all these things, but it means we release our ego of, well, this is the way my life has to look. This is the way it should look. This is what I wanted from day one. And I'm determined I'm going to stay in this and figure it out when it's not even serving us anymore. So we release that ego, we are humble, and we start into that process of the research and understanding. We get to know ourselves, we understand our values, and then we can go to the next step, which is be bold and take the action. So there's like this, like we're saying, like you want to do research, you want to explore things, you don't want to get stuck here because we often will get stuck there too because it feels comfortable and it feels safe to not take this next action that seems scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then we have to actually be bold and take the action. That's where we take like the leap of faith and do those things. So that's kind of this process that we go through is being gentle, and then we get to be humble and release that ego, and then we get to be bold and take action on that.
It sounds absolutely brilliant. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? When you are information gathering, that's great. But you, like you've said, you can't stay there because nothing
No.
changes just because you've got some information. You have to take action. You have to do something. And
Mhm.
you've talked about it doesn't have to be a massive thing. You can start
No.
by taking small actions to build your confidence and figure out what could be an option for you instead, as an alternative. Absolutely brilliant. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I've really, really enjoyed talking to you, Jessica. Thank you for joining me. You have a
Yeah.
free workshop coming up. Could you share a little bit about that for the listeners? So for anyone who's listening and wants to get a taste of what it's like to work with you, just tell us about that.
Yes. So this workshop is called Your Next Best Decision, and it is designed to help you create some momentum in your life of one little thing that you can take action on. So we help you gain that clarity. I work you through these next 3 steps a little bit more, or the triple B formula a little bit more, so that you can understand how that works and see how you can utilize that in your life. I am all about helping women take their next steps. Like, there is nothing more exciting to me than watching a woman step into her life instead of letting life happen to them, going to life happening for them and embracing that and figuring out that they are the catalyst in that. Like, this, you will leave that workshop feeling like, oh my gosh, I do have a voice in my life. I get to have this power in my life. I get to have a say, no longer letting somebody else determine, or a situation determine, the trajectory of my life. And so that's kind of the things that we go through. It is free, so you can come, can see, obviously I have offers on that of ways that we can work together, but it's such a great place to start. And it works out perfectly that I'm talking to you now, because it'll happen shortly after this interview. So I believe it's August 28th is the date for that. So you can come and enjoy that.
Amazing. And amen to all of that, of choosing life and having life happen for you rather than to you. It's a
Yes.
tiny word shift, but it's a huge life shift when you stop being a passenger and you get yourself into the driving seat and take it where you want it to go. So important that you're here doing that work. So thank you. And where can folks connect with you online if they want to find you on socials or go to your website? Where can they find you?
Yeah. So my website is heyjessicafrew.com. You can find me there. And you can also, there's a should score quiz. So if you're shooting all over yourself in your life, you can see how much and where you are shooting on yourself. I am on Instagram. That is where I am the most active, at Hey Jessica Frew as well. And then I have a podcast called Your Next Best Decision. So you can go check that out.
Amazing. I'm going to pop all the links in the show notes for folks that can come and find you. Jessica, thank you for joining me today. This has been a really great conversation and such a powerful one. I believe that it's time for women to get empowered now and step up and, take some of the power back, take up more space, stop apologizing. And this has just been a
Yes.
conversation. We're here for all of that. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening, folks. I really hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I will see you same time next week. Bye for now.